Why do some spells work and some don't? And why do some spells seem to have an immediate effect and some can take months to manifest? Now, there can be a variety of explanations why our magic seems to come to fruition or whether it seems to just simply fall flat. In tonight's episode, we'll be talking about key things to consider when you're evaluating your spell work and your magical practice. So, whether you are newer to the idea of spell work and the craft, or you've been on the path for a long time and you are just looking for some ideas to take your spell work to the next level, there's going to be something for everyone in tonight's episode. So, merry meet, I am Aislin, and this is Ask Aislin, and tonight we are here talking about the keys to spell work. So, welcome to those who are joining us live. I see Kurt is in the chat. Merry meet. And so, if you are with us live, make sure that you get in the chat. Let us know that you're here. You can also leave questions and comments for later. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. And if you are watching back in replay, you can also leave your questions and comments. I go back through the chat later and all the comments later, and I answer everyone or anything we missed during the live. All right, so let us dive in. There is quite a bit to talk about tonight, and this episode is a summary of some of the material that I teach in our signature course, Demystifying Witchcraft. So if you are interested in taking this to the next level and you have not already become a student of Demystifying Witchcraft, you can listen at the very end. We'll be talking about a way that you can join us in that class. But regardless, you will learn a lot today, a lot about how to evaluate your own spellcraft, things to consider when perhaps your spells aren't working in the way that you would like to, some things that you can think about that might help to improve them. And also, if you're newer, as I said, this will give you a good idea of what to consider as you're beginning to plan out some of your future spells. All right, so let's dive in, and we are going to start with the first kind of idea here. And this first idea is first, know thyself. So there is a lot of different areas in this world where it's important for us to first know ourselves. So we hear this in people who are going into counseling positions where they're going to help others, even doctors. It's important to understand yourself first, and really in any of the helping professions. What what this helps us understand is what our motivations are behind most things. So it's my opinion that self-improvement should be a common goal of any spiritual pathway or magical practice pathway, and that would include the pathway of witchcraft or Wicca or traditional witchcraft or Druidism or any, you can insert any kind of magical pathway there. I think that this common unifying goal of many of these paths is to understand yourself first. I've seen, as being a high priestess for many years, being a witch for close to 30 years, or at least identifying as one for close to 30 years. I've seen a lot, especially as I became a high priestess and was training other people. And people often want to jump right in and they want to be doing spell work right away. And I get that because that's where I was too when I first started out. But also made a lot of mistakes in the very beginning because I didn't know myself and I didn't really connect to some of these things that I'm going to talk about tonight. And I really wish that back then, there had been someone who could say to me, maybe you should consider some of these things. It would have actually saved me a lot of kind of grief and a lot of mishaps in some of what I was doing. So just pausing to say hi to some more who are joining us. I see Stephanie is also here, and Elizabeth, and Cindy, and Andrea, and Tracy, and Nancy. So merry meet, everybody. Great to see you all. So the most important magical training that you can do, in my opinion, is to begin to learn who you are. And on the surface, you may feel like I already know who I am. I've been this person for a long time. But what we're really talking about here is understanding what's going on in your unconscious motivations, and also understanding another aspect of you, which is your higher self. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later, how we can connect to the higher self and the importance of doing so. But when we start to understand ourselves, we can also realize that we can become our biggest limitation, which means we also can become the biggest proponent of our own power, right? So if we can limit our power, we also can be the one to empower ourselves. And that is what the goal of sort of understanding who we are is all about. To me, it really should be the main point of magical training. And it's for this reason that when I teach spell work, whether I'm teaching it in person or I'm teaching it in our online classes, to me, spell work comes much later. You learn all of these other factors about the craft, and you start to understand why you're there. What are your motivations for being a witch, or reclaiming that part of you that is a witch? And as you start to break down and understand all of that, spell work actually becomes much easier. You're much better at it as well. You'll see outcomes that you'd only wished about at another time in your life, perhaps. So the main point really of kind of this magical training should be to first clear out the blockages that are in that person's way so they have a clear path forward with their magic. And this can be one of the very best things that you can do for yourself. And that is why we sort of begin with this first step. So, one thing that you can really benefit from is exploring your energy. So, this not only helps us to figure out where there are blockages in the energetic body, which for pretty much most of us, almost all of us, I would say there are energetic blockages in various parts of your body that are contributing to you being less powerful than you could. Right? So, as you start to work and you start to understand energy, you start to understand where it's blocked in your own body. You become a barometer. You understand where the compromised areas are, and you also understand when you remove them. You can feel the difference. This also will help you learn how to move energy better, because one of the factors of becoming very successful with magic is also knowing how to move it. So, knowing how to move energy inside of your body, knowing how to move energy from inside your body to the outside, for example, to charge an item perhaps, knowing how to move energy from outside of your body into your body. Perhaps when you are drawing up energy from the earth, or you're drawing in energy from the moon and the skies above you. So, as you work through energy, you start to become better at moving energy, and that's going to make you more effective at your spell work as well. Now, another factor that comes in here about kind of knowing yourself and knowing your energy is really having a good relationship with your solar plexus. Your solar plexus is your internal sun. This is the heat that fuels your body, and it's also where your will is, which is very much connected to our magic, and it's also where your self-belief is, and it's also where your self-doubt is. And so many people suffer from self doubt, even the people who seem to be very self assured. People are sometimes surprised to find that I do suffer very much from my self doubt, and that's why I've made it such a goal to work on that and to transform that into self belief. And I wasn't always as confident as I am now, and able to get online and teach people and share my experiences. But a lot of that has had to do with this belief, the self belief work that I've done with my solar plexus. So if you can increase your self belief, you have less things in the way of your magic. And so another thing to also kind of consider is the idea of self-actualization as part of the spiritual development program. Now, shadow work is something that can very much help us understand who we are. It helps us learn how to self-actualize, to truly become who we are, and not kind of a version of ourselves that we think other people want us to be. It helps us to understand, our truer motivations. It helps us to connect to our higher self. Shadow work is not the only pathway to self-actualization, but it is one that's very, very accessible to witches in particular, people who are drawn to magical pathways. So, kind of now segueing into the next idea that we're going to talk about, but sort of summarizing this one, think about I think about like in Star Wars, for example, and the training that Luke is doing with Yoda, right, to become a Jedi Master. And there was always this element of training. There's the physical part of it, there's the mental part of it. And there's also this idea of facing your own darkness, right? To really become a powerful Jedi, somebody who was trained in the Force and knew how to use it in the right way, you had to understand who you were. And the same goes for our magic. If you don't really fully understand who you are, if you don't understand the kind of whims and things that pull you away from your center, if you're reacting all the time and you don't know why, it points us back to there's shadow work to be done for all of us. And I think those who find their way onto the shadow work path, they discover that they don't even have to do a whole lot, and they find that their magic has become that much more improved, right? The power behind it is much greater because they have removed some of these blockages, whether they are the energetic ones in the body we were talking about, or these more mental ones that that our shadow work can help us remove. So the other thing that I think about too is I think about the 8 limbs of yoga, which is basically a training program that helps take a yogi from like the very starting position to becoming sort of a master of themselves. And in the West, we don't really understand this at all. We think yoga is just those asanas, those movements, and yoga is this whole entire thing that includes training the mind. And the first step, the first 2 limbs of this is the niyamas and the yamas. And these are guiding principles that help a person become the best version of themselves that they can. Now, the reason why in the ancient texts that was taught first, before you ever taught anybody the positions of the body to put themselves into, before you ever taught them how to meditate or breathe or any of those things that help lead them to enlightenment, they would learn these sort of ideals first. And they would learn how to reflect on those and figure out how they worked with their own lives. And the reason for this is there was this thought is if you taught them all that other stuff first, how to become very powerful in their body and their mind, they would use that power for the wrong reason. So if you teach them how to know themselves first, then you assure that they are doing everything for the right reason. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from that, with our own magic. So that will help us segue into the next topic. And let's see here. Kurt is saying he got lucky right. He got lucky right after he decided to learn about the craft. He got in touch with the coven. Yes, and finding a group to train with can be a very powerful thing. We're going to talk about group work as one of the keys as well. Nancy is saying she feels the same way. She wishes she could have gone deeper into it earlier. And yeah, and sometimes I think about that and I'm like, man, I wish I could have known some of this back then. But we all come to the paths in the right way. I firmly believe that. So, and Elizabeth was saying, where do you learn the yoga principles? So they're called the 8 limbs, and in particular, the 2 that, so these sort of key principles are the yamas. I'll put this in the chat here. Yamas and niyamas, and you can just Google that and you'll be able to read what they are. And one that's probably most familiar to people is there's an idea called a himsa. A himsa is the idea of nonviolence. And so people will take this all the way to like becoming vegetarians, but there's also, and that's not necessary at all, but that is one extension of doing that. But it's kind of considering the places where we do harm, and then one thing we often forget is the way we do harm to ourselves. So I think it's really interesting to study the namas and the niyamas and the yamas. In our Shadow Seekers group, we are going to be doing a module on that eventually as well. We're going to get to dive in. Everybody's going to get to learn about all of them and see how they kind of play out in their own lives. But they can be really eye-opening to kind of read through them. There's another one called Satya, which is about truth. Like, are you speaking your truth? Are you being truthful to yourself? And then you just contemplate these ideas, and through that, you learn who you are. It makes you more effective at being who you are. Okay, so let us talk about the next idea, the next key, the next step here. These don't really go in order, though I did start with know yourself because I do think it should be the foundation at least. Okay, so your unconscious mind can get in your way. So this is a big idea for us to consider, especially when we find that the results that we are receiving are not the results that we desire. So it's really important to take a step back and ask, could there be any way that my own unconscious is getting in my way? And if the answer is yes, then the solution is don't let it get in your way. That's much easier to say than to do. So we'll talk about how you would figure that out. But to many witches, I post a post many times a year that will ask you what's your favorite tool to work with. And many people will say, I find that my mind is my most favorite tool to work with. And so for many witches, there is this idea that the magic starts in the mind. And there is a connection to the etheric plane. Sometimes we can call this the quantum field, the quantum sea. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But this is the part of us that essentially truly connects to the unconscious, connects to what's outside of us and also what's buried within us. And we can deliberately shape this material in the etheric plane through our thoughts, and in particular through working with our unconscious, then we know that we are shaping it in the right way. So what we may find is that we have conflicts, we may have old trauma, we have various other limiting beliefs that perhaps we are carrying that can limit our ability to kind of connect into that etheric plane and really find ourselves there, fixed there. And much of this has to do with doubt, like I talked about earlier. There's this idea like even if you think you fully believe it, there can always be this sort of nagging, lingering, unconscious doubt. But we may also have to dig deep inside to figure out the places where we self sabotage ourselves. So we can self sabotage ourselves in our physical lives, and we can also self sabotage ourselves in our magical lives. So whenever I see somebody who's doing a spell, for example, and they're not really getting the results that they work, the answer they don't want to hear is go in and you got to kind of figure out where could the unconscious blockages be, what limiting beliefs do you have surrounding this intention. But usually that is the answer for them. And when they dive in and they start to really uncover where these blockages coming from, you know, starting to remove some of those blockages, and they find that the pathway opens and the magic now works. That's of course where our shadow work can come in. But there can also be cultural issues too with the practice of magic. So there's some cultures that sort of look at magic as just being a part of the culture. And if you are from a culture like that, if you grew up in a family where like kind of the magical is just accepted, you're going to find you have less resistance than a person who grew up in a place where magic was not accepted. Households where you were told that it was stupid to believe what you believed. As a kid, you may have been somebody who saw things, could see through the veils, could communicate with animals and other spirits and things like that, and people around you told you that you couldn't, that it was make believe, that you're crazy. So all of these things, even if we feel we've pushed through them as an adult, they still can linger in the unconscious. And so you really want to kind of think about your upbringing, think about the messages that were taught to you about magic, about sort of witchcraft and the unseen, and see if you can work through some of those if you find that there are blockages there. That can be a way of really pulling back kind of some of the limitations. What you also may notice too is if you have nagging beliefs about like your abilities, like I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm going to mess it up. A lot of people will write to me and they're like, I'm so afraid I'm going to mess the spell up. And this is where this idea of intention really comes from. I don't think you're going to mess the spell up. Like, unless you're doing like high ceremonial magic where something has to be done in exactly the right way with the right words and the right ingredients, the majority of time you're not doing that high magic. And if you are doing that high magic, that's a whole different kind of training and you become more confident in that. But if you're doing, more folk magic, more of the magic like, I guess it's just the magic that isn't high ceremonial magic, you have less to worry about. You're not going to mess things up. But where do these ideas come from that you are always going to mess things up, that you are not worthy of the things that you desire? When you don't really know where those ideas are coming from, they just become ingrained in you. You feel like they're part of you. It's your voice in your head. But if you work backwards and you figure out where it comes from, that's where you start to understand it's not your voice. I was able to work through some of this and understand that it was my dad's voice. I still love my dad very much, but we're going to disagree on this idea, you know? And once I realized that it was his voice that was kind of holding me back, that was the big game changer in my magic. That is what propelled me forward out into doing this online work and where I am right now. So really think about it. You know, where do the limiting beliefs come from? What do people around you think of magic? People you were growing up with think about it, and really spend some time thinking about this one, because if you remove this blockage, it can be a big deal. So let's look at the next idea here, and hold on, just refreshing this. I think there's like comments I'm not seeing, but oh well. I think they'll refresh as we go. Okay, so the next idea is changes in the etheric plane. So now we're going to talk about this etheric plane. Changes in the etheric plane can mean changes in the physical world. This is really how our magic works. So when people say, you know, 99% of your magic is mental, there's a real truth to this. If you can change things mentally in the etheric plane, you have a better chance of changing them here in the physical world. Now, the act that gets created in your mind can manifest through physical causality outside in this world. This is where this idea of as above, so below comes from. So the as above is, you could think of it as kind of the cosmos. I think of it more as like just outside of us. The etheric plane is essentially just on top of us. So when we cross through the veils, we're not necessarily like traversing physical space. We're traversing through like dimensional space, right? And so this as above, so below, as within, so without. So the things that we create outside in the etheric plane can make changes within us, and can also change things in the physical world. So in our when we are working in our spellcraft, we want to think about how we are connecting to the etheric plane. Now, some also call it the quantum sea, like I mentioned before. The quantum sea, the etheric plane, it's a place where all things are possible. Now, not all things are possible due to the physics of this world, of this plane, but all things are possible there. So if you can imagine it, the beauty of this is that you can manifest it somewhere. Doesn't necessarily mean you can manifest it here. If you can imagine a dragon, you can manifest it somewhere. You can manifest it in the etheric plane. You can manifest it in your lucid dreaming. You can manifest it in your astral travel. Maybe not necessarily here. But anything that you can imagine, you can manifest somewhere, and that is the founding principle of magic. So the other idea is that there is different layers of how much energy it takes to produce certain outcomes. So that kind of moves us into sort of the next idea here. So it takes a great amount of energy to create a change in the physical realm, and magical outcomes are directly proportional to time and effort that are put in. So the way this works is that the more that you put in, and this is not necessarily like, it can be time, it can be effort, but the more that you put in, the more that you can expect to receive out. So the same thing goes like with your magical training, right? Like, you know, like if you dabble in things, you will receive less than if you have a dedicated spiritual practice. So that's why I always tell people, like, one of the best things you can possibly do is set up some kind of dedicated daily practice or almost daily practice, so you're on it like most of the time, right? This means that you're going to be better at moving energy. This means you're going to be better at knowing yourself. This means you're going to be better at manipulating energy and working with spirits and things around you, because you are doing it more often than if you're just dabbling. But kind of the same thing goes with our spell work. If we just sort of like do this kind of half-assed spell, we should expect kind of a half-assed result, right? But if you take the time and you go through a series of sort of like a checklist and kind of figure out if you're ready to do it, if you know your intention. I'm going to talk sort of about that in a bit, like what's kind of the checklist you would go through. But if you know, if you've done all of that, you can expect greater outcomes. So your effort can be the effort that you put in. It could be like the energy you put in. It can also be time. It can also be mental. It can also be energetic. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same all the time. So what I mean by this is, let's say like effort is time. So perhaps that the thing itself that you're doing isn't very effortful. So let's suppose it's just lighting a candle, right? Not very effortful. Maybe you light it and you think for a moment about your intention. Still, not a ton of effort went into that. But let's say you do that every single day for 30 days, for like an entire cycle. The time is going to kind of compensate for the fact that there was a lower effort level in that spell. Now, on the other hand, let's suppose you put in like this great amount of effort and you plan out the times that you're going to do this spell. Let's say you study, you figure out the day of the week, and maybe you figure out the planetary hours, and maybe you have a deity and you've researched this deity and you've written an invocation or an evocation to that deity, and you have gathered materials and you have researched the correspondences of these materials, and you have crafted this entire kind of working. And maybe the working itself only takes you a little bit of time to do it, but you put all that back time in and you do it and you kind of let that magic go. So that can be, you don't have to like repeat that over and over and over again because you put so much effort into the beginning. So you can see how you can sort of think of effort and time and what you're putting in different ways, right? To me, it's usually more effort that you put in the beginning means less time to actually do the spell. The less time you're actually doing it, like just lighting the candle, perhaps and the less effort you're doing it, the more times you have to repeat it. The other thing too is it sort of depends on what you are trying to attract. So there's sort of these key ideas about like how we attract things. So if you have a lot of self-doubt, you're going to need to put more work in order to overcome the self-doubt, right? Especially if you haven't been able to work through it yet. If you don't have a lot of self-doubt, then you would have less effort that you have to put in. So it's all going to be relative to where you are with that intention, and that can change depending on what intention it is you're working at. Also, the other thing to think about is how big is the intention. There's some intentions that are much bigger than others. So, for example, getting $1,400 to pay bills, right, or kind of set you above where you are right now is a lot different than trying to attract $2 million in order to, buy a house or something like that, or buy a couple of houses or something like that. So bigger intentions we will often do better with bigger intentions if either we put a lot of effort into it, a lot of planning into it, or we kind of make it into several small workings that we repeat cycle after cycle that sort of compounds the energy. So if I was working towards something really, really big, I would probably elect to do it over the course of maybe 3 or 4 lunar cycles. I do it on the same day of that lunar cycle, so like maybe the full moon or maybe the first quarter or whatever day it is you decide. And then I would do that same working for like 4 cycles, especially if it's a very, very, very big idea or big intention I'm trying to draw in. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And I'm going to keep checking the comments here. Okay, now I can see the comments. So Cindy had said, as a child, she said, I was mirror gazing but didn't understand it. My parents said I was just playing my active imagination, but I believe I was seeing and talking to spirits. Yeah, and sometimes, and it's a very common story that I hear too from people is like, I was just sort of told this was my imagination. Many people who find their way to the craft will look back at their childhood and they will notice things like that, where people had told them this was just your imagination, this just you kind of playing. And now you sort of look back and you're like, well, that was actually me sort of seeing through the veils, right, before I was taught that I shouldn't be able to, or something like that. And then as adults, we have to sort of relearn how to do that. But the important thing, I think, is to not feel like bad, like, or, oh, I wish it could have been different when I was a kid. It doesn't matter what happened there. Like I said, everything that has led up to this moment for a reason. It makes you who you are right now. And it's the person you are right now that you need to address. So what do you need most right now to grow in your craft? Probably not to, if you are looking back to the past, it's to try to understand motivations, try to resolve limiting beliefs and things like that, but not for us to feel bad about it. And I'm not saying that Cindy is, but I know that a lot of people, like I have regret too. Sometimes I'll be like, I just wish it was like different. I wish I could have known some of this stuff back then that I know right now. Okay, so I feel like I'm missing one of my there was something I was going to say, and I don't see it on these cards. So I'm just going to say it now because I don't think I'm saying it later. But I wanted to talk about kind of going along with the last idea of sort of effort, putting effort in. It tends to be easiest when it comes to magic. The easiest thing that you can do is change your mind. So if you can change the way you think about yourself, like through your magic, that is like the easiest magic. And magic will often take the pathway of least resistance. Maybe I am going to talk about that later. Let me see here. Sometimes I know it was in the notes and I don't, well, yeah, I think I'm going to talk about it later. But anyway, so hold that thought. But magic will take the path of least resistance. Usually changing your mind is the easiest thing to do through your magic. Okay, but let's talk for a moment about groups. So Kurt had mentioned finding a coven, being very lucky to have found one. That's not a less common story than most people. Most people aren't lucky enough to find one. It can be challenging. The witch box used to exist. It's a sad day that it no longer exists, but it used to be a way that people could network and find covens. It's how I found people in Boston, 20 years ago. It's how I found my first coven out here in Los Angeles. And initially, it's how we found people for our in-person coven here when I became the high priestess. But it's no longer there anymore, so it is much harder to find covens. So gratefully, there are covens online that you can find, especially if you're in remote areas where, there aren't people around you. But what I wanted to mention here, so like groups can produce results that sometimes can seem bigger than individuals alone. Now, there's a few caveats here because groups that don't get along can't produce much of anything. So that goes for just your physical world as well as your magical world. But if I hear stories of people in kind of magical groups or covens or things like that where there's infighting and there's arguing and there's issues with leadership, and that's not the kind of group I'm talking about. The kind of group I'm talking about are people, when individuals kind of come together and they know each other really well and they've practiced magic together for a long time, they tend to be able to enhance one another's magic. So this can be something to, consider if you are interested in joining a group, getting to know them. It can be a long process of getting to know people for this kind of work. It should be. This is why many times there's like long periods of time between levels in covens, because it's to get people to know who each other are, so they know if the magic is going to be the right fit for them or that connection is going to be the right fit for them. But groups who work together will often find this sort of this syncing of their energy that happens when they are together. But what happens if we are not in a group? And I'm definitely not saying that groups are the best way to go. Definitely not for sure. That's not what I'm saying. But if we're not in a group and we want to enhance our practice, there are some other things that we can do. Because if we look at what happens in groups, a lot of times when groups get together, we can learn a lot from what they're doing together that we can then bring into our solitary practice. So one of the things that they're often doing is they're calling everything sort of the same way. So they have a lot of times there will be a set liturgy of how you cast a circle and how you call quarters. There will be perhaps there's like clothing that you wear. There might be official clothing that group or that coven wears. There can be cords that you wear also that would signify the level that you're in the coven. There can be a certain kind of music that they play or a certain incense that's always burned. And so we can learn a lot. And quarter candles are often the same ones every single time. The candles that are used are the same ones. And we can learn a ton from that. So we can bring some of those ideas into our solitary practice. So if you really want to elevate your solitary practice, really think about repetition. So can you have like a set of quarter candles that you just always use? Can you try, especially if you got a lot of doubt, could you try wearing the same outfit for the next several magical workings that you do? Set that aside. Put that aside as just your magical outfit. Like I have a dress I do not wear anywhere but here when I am leading rituals online. It's my magical dress, and it's just a dress from H&M. There's nothing special about it. But when I put it on, it's like your unconscious mind is like, okay, I know what's about to happen. Same thing with like the candles or incense, putting on similar music. When you do those same things over and over again, and you only do them when you are engaged in magical practice, your unconscious mind is like, I get what's about to happen, and it's going to make it easier for you to become open and receptive. So that would be my advice of sort of like helping us learn from those experiences of groups and what makes groups kind of the magic that they produce so powerful. And we can try to learn a little bit about that and apply it to our solitary practice. Okay, so I mentioned we were going to talk about sort of a checklist that we can sort of check off. And this is 4 things to sort of think about when we are doing a spell. So the first one is intention. And then these next ones, intention is probably the most important one of all. And then these other 3 sort of aid your spell. But having some kind of a visualization or some way that, whether it's visualization or it's thinking the thoughts, but some way to sort of focus on that intention. And then we have some kind of way that we work with energy. And then we have some way that we release the magic, right? So if we can consider those factors, that's going to help produce better magic for us. So let's first think about the intent, and it's really important to think about what your intention is. So I always say is when you're thinking about the intent, think about what you can do in the mundane world first. So I always believe that the universe rewards our hard work. It rewards that, like I said, magic, and we're going to get to that idea in a moment, but magic is going to take the path of least resistance. So if what you want to do the working for is something you could have just done in the mundane world, it's better to do it in the mundane world. So I like to say, like, kind of think about your intent. Think about, have I covered my bases in the mundane world? Have I done what I can do there? And once I've kind of done that, then I move on to the intention of the magic. It also helps for us to be in more alignment with, our true self, our higher self as well. Like we talked about in the beginning, know thyself. It helps for us in our intentions to know who we are, what we need, and what we want. Now, I think it's also really important with your intention, I say to voice it too. So if you're someone who's a little shy about saying it out loud, to really challenge yourself, because that activates your throat chakra, which is going to help you activate that creative center of the body. So your throat chakra is a creativity center of your energetic body. And when we voice intentions, it's like an extra layer in the magic. So I was somebody who did a lot of magic, like just mentally, and I would repeat it in my head. And then as I started learning more of these Eastern techniques, I was like, there's a super huge, big power in the voice. And so even if you're whispering, at least you're still using the voice. But if you can use the voice even bigger, like say it out loud like this, that can help lend that extra layer to your magic. And the other thing too is I think that it also helps you when you express it to be able to hear whether it's clear or not clear. So we want to try to make that intention clear enough that it doesn't get confused in the universe. So one of the ideas I've said in the past is, like, if you're looking for love, sometimes you need to be clear on what that means. Love comes in lots of different forms, and it can be a bunch of kittens, a cat giving birth to a bunch of kittens in your yard. And if that's not the kind of love that you're looking for, we want to be more clear about what that love is. Like, I'm looking for a romantic partner, and maybe you're looking for one that's temporary, or maybe you're looking for like one that you're going to be with for a long time. So just make sure that the intention is clear. Now, once you have your intention, many books will say to now you will do this visualization, but I know from working with people that visualization isn't always very easy for everybody. So you can think about this as visualization. So if you visualize well, then you visualize that intention. You try to visualize your intention. You want to do something that's going to imprint it on the etheric plane. Now, if you can't visualize very well and you're kind of worried about that step of it, what you can do is you can think the thoughts. Okay, so you think it, maybe you repeat the intention over and over in your mind, or you repeat it out loud, even better, over and over, and you activate your throat chakra. But you're doing something that is focusing the intention, and we're getting it essentially outside of just that beginning intention that we wrote, and we're making it bigger, right? We're giving it more life. Once we are able to do that, actually, I should mention this too. So in two, if you think that, like, let's say visualization's kind of hard, so it'd be hard to sort of visualize your ideal partner or something like that. Are you happy with your ideal partner if you're working on a love spell? But you can visualize a heart. So maybe you can think of a symbol or something that is easier for you to visualize and focus your energy on, focus that kind of intention on that symbol. That can be easier too. Now, once we get past that step, we're sort of focusing our intention. Now we think about a way that we're going to raise energy. So you can raise energy in your own body. So if you start to practice like energy work and you're doing breath work and kundalini, you might know how to raise big amounts of energy in your body. You can just use your own body to do it. But there's other ways to raise energy. You can chant, you can sing, all of that's activating the throat chakra, so very good. You can clap, you can drum, you can move your body, you can dance. Intuitive movement can raise energy. I like to rub my palms together because it's an immediate feeling. You can feel the energy being raised, or you can rub your nail beds together like this, and that's another way to raise energy. So we just need some way that we can raise some energy. And then once we have raised the energy, then we need a way to release the energy. So what I usually think about is you kind of combine these steps. So we're combining the focus. So we're focusing our intent, whether it's through visualization or a symbol or maybe a mantra that we're thinking in our heads. And then we're raising this energy. And then at some point, you let the energy go and you send the energy out into the universe, carrying with it the intent. And then from there, you do really want this to be a release. So you want to try not to hold on to it. So if you think about it and you're ruminating on what you've just done, you're sort of pulling it back towards you. So you just want to think of it, it's done. The magic is done, and it's over. And I haven't been to an in-person ritual that I haven't led in some time, but I went to a self-love ritual over the weekend, and we did this whole spell that you then took the materials at the end and you were supposed to take them to a crossroads or to a bus stop or a train stop, somewhere there's a lot of traffic going by, and you throw it in the trash and you walk away and you don't think about it. And it's really powerful, right? So I took it immediately that night. I took it to a bus stop. I threw it in the trash and I walked away, and it's just, don't even think about it. It's already done. So you just act as though it's done, and the universe does respond to that. But that's really where this release comes from. You release the energy, and then you sort of release your clinging to it, and you let the universe do its work. Okay, so some good comments in here. Cersei was saying she misses Witchbox. I know, me too. I've always wished somebody would figure out how to just start it back up. I know it was money and time is what got in the way for them, but I know I wish somebody would start it back up. Elizabeth says she prefers being solitary, but she has some beautiful friends that we discuss our magical ideals and read tarot together, sometimes do a bonfire for a Sabbath. We're a loosely knit kind of group, but we depend on each other. And she said, I love those gals. Yeah. And see, that's exactly, it doesn't have to be a formal coven. But you can see there's like that special bond that you all have together, and that kind of adds the parts can become greater than the whole, right? Or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, I should say. Um, okay. So Tracy's got a question here, and I will answer that one in the Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to remember to go back to that one. Okay, so the next thing also to talk about is mental conditioning facilitates good spell work. So the idea here is that relaxation really is the key. If you are kind of amped up, if you are anxious, if you are worried, if you are not really in a great mental state, it can hinder your spell work. Stress tends to hinder our abilities in the mundane world as well as the magical world. So I always like to tell this story. Years and years ago, there was someone in our coven kind of early on when I had first become a high priestess, and she was working a lot. And she came to a ritual, and she was like on like 5 or 6 cups of coffee. And so her energy was very like very scattered energy, right? And she, you could tell, like, she, I don't know that she could necessarily tell that she wasn't feeling well, but other people around her, as being kind of very sensitive energy, were picking it up. And really the ritual was not very good because of it. Like, you'd see everybody was sort of thrown off by this energy. And so sometimes it's important for us to sort of think about how our energy is going to affect not just others, like if you were going to a group, but just think about how your energy is going to affect your own spell work. Like, even doing a spell on 6 cups of coffee, if it's like, for some people, you can drink 6 cups of coffee and it doesn't make them shaky or agitated or things like that. But if it does, um, it could be worth reconsidering the timing of that spell. If you're not feeling emotionally or physically well, you might want to consider postponing it. And I know for myself, like, I've pushed through and I've done spells in the past because it was the full moon, you got to do it, right? Or I had it like timed, and I wanted to do it on this exact time, and I thought, oh, it's not going to be as good if I wait till a later time. But when we're not at our best emotionally and mentally, we're going to have this hard time connecting to the etheric plane. We're going to have a hard time finding the alpha state within us. 6 cups of coffee is going to be hard for many people to find alpha. And it's really the state that the brain needs to be lowered down into in order to pass through the veils and into the etheric plane. So I would think about ways that you can facilitate yourself. Like, if you're not really feeling the magic that night, or not feeling really good, consider postponing till the next day. Most magical workings can be done at different times, and you can recalculate the time if you need to, or if it's something like a full moon, it can always be done a day or two afterwards, even 3 days. You're still sort of feeling that energy. So really think about that, and then also think about, like, if you are somebody who carries a lot of stress, how can you start to bring that kind of down, because that stress it's probably going to impact your magic. So you can bring that stress down through breath work. You can bring it down through meditation. But sometimes meditation can be hard when people are highly stressed, and breath work and movement, intuitive movement, things like that can be better sometimes. But this is also why having a daily spiritual and energetic practice can be so useful, because it's training your body how to adapt better to stress. I know for me, when I notice that I slip out of those practices, I can watch. Like, I have an app that tracks my stress, and it starts to go up. I notice I don't sleep as well. I notice I'm more agitated. I'm less patient. Things like that. But when I'm doing my practices, my daily practices of breath work and moving energy and things like that, I don't suffer in that same way. So that's the importance of kind of having that daily practice. And then in turn, you're going to feel more open and receptive to the energy that's around you. Okay. So the next thing too is learning how to communicate with your higher self. So let's talk about, this is the last step, or the last one I have on here. All my notes got kind of thrown out of order. So with the higher self, like there is also this idea of the will versus the true will, and this can also help us kind of consider what's going on with the higher self. So I'm just trying to find my notes. Okay, here they are. Okay, so understanding the difference between your will and your true will help you connect to your higher self. Now, Aleister Crowley, he said that magic is the art and science of causing changes to occur in conformity with the will. So many people hear that as the definition of magic, but also sometimes people misunderstand what he is talking about. So he even said himself, when he said the word will in that statement, he did not mean just the will of doing anything. He said it meant the will of the true will. So there is this difference between will and true will. Your will is anything you do. If you want to do something, you will do it, right? And you do it. You use your will to push it forward and make that thing happen. And you can will yourself to do anything. And whenever you are using your own autonomy to make choices and decisions for yourself, that's part of your will. So you can choose to do things that are not in alignment with what's best for you, but you're still exercising your will, right? Because you have that freedom. But things that are not good for you are not going to be connected to your true will. Now, your true will is what's connected to your higher self. It's connected to the path that is sort of you and perhaps guides before you were incarnated chose certain things that would happen. Like not everything in your life is fated. I don't believe that, but I do believe we incarnate into this world with a set amount of things that we are here to work on. And some of those things we will work on and achieve, and some of those things we will avoid and not achieve. But when we find that we're aligned more with our true will and our higher self, we understand better what our life pathway and our life purpose is. So, your will might say, win the lottery and take it easy for the rest of your life, right? But your true will knows that there was actually like work that has to be done, and it was part of the sort of the plan of how you would spiritually elevate in this incarnation. So sometimes what can happen is when spells don't work, there's always this possibility that it's just not aligned with your true will. And but you won't really know that until you do some of this work. You've got to, kind of when you work through your shadow work, when you get rid of your blockages, when you learn how to really connect to the higher self, which many people will call the soul or that thing outside of you that exists between incarnations. Sometimes people will even say that the higher self is like, it's like the part of you that is deity, right? The part that connects to the deities. And in some cases, some people will say you are God, the gods, right? The gods are you. You are the gods. But that higher self, whether that higher self is the gods or that higher self is the way that you connect to the gods, that's the part of you that's outside of this sort of like earthly world that gets kind of trapped in your limiting beliefs and your fears and your traumas and the past and all and your fears of the future and all of those things. So it's not an easy thing. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and be like, okay, now I just want to operate under the true will and I want to totally understand my higher self. But you can get there through all of this work, through kind of figuring out who you are, removing your blockages. And then it becomes easier to see if the intentions you have are aligned with your true will or not, or if they're just like part of your regular will. So I hope that makes sense. It's sort of like at the very end of all of it, it's the icing on the cake. It's probably the hardest thing to achieve because even as you start to work, like it's like next to impossible to always be anchored into your higher self. And if you were, you probably wouldn't need to be incarnated here unless you were a bodhisattva or something, and you'd come back to lead everybody else to enlightenment. But most of us, we will move in and out of that ability to connect to the higher self and understand our true will. But as you elevate spiritually, you do more work on yourself, you get closer and closer to that place, and it gets easier and easier to connect to it and kind of be able to check in and say, is this decision I'm making aligned with my will or not, or with my true will or not? But it is something to consider, when magic, you've tried everything with your magic and maybe you've even gone back and you've, done all the troubleshooting and it still doesn't work. It is worth contemplating. Like, have I asked my higher self? Have I talked to my guides? Do I know that this is actually in alignment with my true will? And then the final thing I wanted to talk about, I mentioned earlier, is that magic will take the path of least resistance. So I started by saying there's sort of several pathways that magic can travel in, and it's going to take the one that's the easiest one. So like I said, if what you are trying to do can be done in this mundane world, then it is probably better to try to do it in this mundane world. It's probably going to be the most effective use of your energy. Now, it is going to be easier for you to change your own mind. That's going to be the easiest pathway. So if you can do a spell that can help you change your state of being, that is going to be the easiest spell that you can do, because there's not a lot, like there's not a lot of other factors. There's not other people that are involved. It's just you and it's your mental state. So sometimes that can be the most effective kind of spell, is to change your mind, a spell to change your mindset. Now, after that, probably the next easiest pathway that energy can take is to change, it's easier to change minds than it is to change matter. Okay, so it's going to be easier to change somebody else's mind than it is going to be able to change, like, sort of the outside world, the physics of the outside world. And then that kind of leads us to that. It's going to be easier to it's going to be easier to change kind of things in the outside world than it is to change the laws of physics, right? So that we can fly or things like that. You know, it's this is where I'm going. Like, we can't manifest everything on this plane. So you sort of think about those different pathways. And when you're thinking about your own intention, you want to think about, like, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to change my mind? Am I trying to change somebody else's mind? Am I trying to change matter around me? Perhaps I'm trying to change biology. So in that case, I could be trying to heal somebody, right? I may be trying to heal their body, so I'm trying to change biology. So these are all going to be like deeper levels that are going to require more energy, because again, magic and energy takes the pathway of least resistance. So you always want to think about, like, could my spell work at one of those kind of easier levels, like changing my mind, changing somebody else's mind, or do I really want to try to change the physical world around me? And those spells will be a little bit more difficult, but of course they can be done. But again, all of this, what it all comes down to, is really understanding your intentions, understanding yourself, and through that, you know, going all the way back to the beginning of this, know thyself. If you know yourself and you start to know yourself, that is the first step to any magic that you produce. Um, and then I'm just going to close with, like, I've told this story before, so I'm sure some of you have heard it. But again, it goes back to why I teach the spell work always at the end of everything. Is once, many years ago, I think, probably near the beginning of when I became a high priestess, and we had different classes of people who would come through. And there were these two women who sort of joined in on one of the classes, and their intentions of being there seemed strange to many of the inner court and people who had been there a little bit longer. They didn't seem as serious as everybody else who had kind of arrived, but you know, you never know. And so, like, they started taking the classes with us, and they were very eager. They really wanted to learn about was spells. They weren't really interested in anything else we were talking about, which was a bit of a troubling to us. And then I found out, not long after that, we were probably on maybe the third class or something, which is where we start talking about energy and how energy works. And then I come to find out that they were selling spells on eBay or something, or online, and they were saying that they were already part of our coven. And so these people are like, they're very fast forwarded ahead of where they needed to be. You know, they need to be back at the beginning, kind of trying to understand, why are you here? What are your motivations for this? But it's always something to kind of, think about. Like, nobody here I know is not doing things like that. But you don't have to get ahead of yourself. You don't have to know it all right away. You don't have to figure out everything. Take it a step at a time, and learn as you go. And just know, you absorb it. It changes the information you learned in the beginning. You may want to go back and revisit that too, because you see it through different eyes now. So just always being open and receptive, and kind of humble and open to the universe, I think, is probably my best advice when it comes to the keys to spell work. Okay, so I'm going to end there. And this week, I don't really have, Tracy put a question in the chat we're going to talk about in just a minute. I didn't really have any that were, oh, Elizabeth said the rain spell worked. Yeah, it did. It was a little delayed, but it did work. And Elizabeth's also saying, what is a bodhisattva? So a bodhisattva is a person who has reached enlightenment, but rather than, and this usually comes from like the Buddhist or the Hindu faith. Um, but it's somebody who has reached enlightenment, is at the place where they can leave the wheels of karma and they don't have to come back and be incarnated again, but they choose to come back for the sole purpose of not working on themselves, but to aid other people in their enlightenment. So most of us are not that person. We are here to work on ourselves, but sometimes there are people who are, they're like saints, uh, just very, 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 very spiritual people who are like, their goal is to just help everybody else. Okay, so like I said, I didn't have any questions sent to me. We are having a major issue with social media that maybe some of you can help me with. But where our posts are reaching next to no one in our 3,600 person group. And I've gone through and pruned out some of the people who aren't engaging, have been in the group for like 3 years and never engaged in anything to see if I could help, but it's not really helping. So the post where we ask a question to get people to give us questions for the Q&A, it reached, I think, like 9 or 10 people today. So I have some theories on why we're being suppressed in the algorithm. But how you guys can help me is if you are a member of the Body Mind Witchcraft group, make sure when the posts come up in your feed that you like them or you comment on them. You also may have to go physically to the group and scroll through the feed because the algorithm is not serving those to members of the group right now. And I see Kurt said he has the same issue. With us though, we had one of the most active groups. We had our engagement rate was 4 times what's actually normal on Facebook. And for some reason, all of a sudden, we have been cut. Like our tarot posts that usually reach hundreds of people, we would have probably 40 or 50 comments on it. By now, we've had 7 the last I looked. So I suspect I know what's going on with the algorithm, but we do need more people to engage. And so if you're not seeing the post, go to the group, and then you can go through the feed and hopefully comment on them there. But like Elizabeth saying, she said, I didn't even see that post. Exactly, because it's not being shown to people. So we're very, very concerned because, this is a group I've spent a lot of time making sure it was engaged, and now look at it. But we want to make sure the people who love this group get to continue to see the material. The other thing you can also do if you are a member of that Facebook group, Body Mind Witchcraft, make sure that your setting is set to see all posts. Otherwise, the algorithm will select posts for you to see. And I think there are other kinds of posts that are taking priority in the feeds right now, and they are not posts about spirituality. So just make sure that's one way that you can combat it. But I don't, so long story to tell you why I don't have any questions for the Q&A today, but I'm going to answer Tracy's now. So let me go back. And then anybody else has any that they want to put in here, I'll go through the feed now. Okay, let me find. Okay, so Tracy said, I have someone who hates me and I've had it verified by others. Okay, so how is the best way to manifest or set a spell to block him? Okay, great question. So a couple of things to just consider is is the person somebody who practices magic, and are they actually sending kind of negative magic back towards you, or is it just like a projection of sort of thoughts and an attitude of dislike? Either way, what I'm going to say is going to help with either way. But if you do think the person has cast a spell on you, then you might want to just do some kind of like a reversal of that spell. And so you can get reversal candles. Now, reversal candle, you can create one yourself where you infuse it with the intention of reversing any negativity that has been sent towards you. There are also ones that you can purchase, And sometimes I like to get those because it just has an extra layer of magic in it. And I personally do reversal candles at least once a month, because that way, if anybody has sent any kind of negative energy towards me, it reverses it backwards. But even if the person hasn't sent anything to you magically, they're still sending you negative thoughts and negative energy. And you said it's been verified by others. So what I would do is I would really bolster your own protection. So it's kind of like at your house, right? If you thought there were people trying to break into your house, you would invest in a better security system, something that would physically keep people out. So you want to have that same kind of presence in your energetic kind of space as well. So one of the things that I like to do is carrying stones. First of all, just carrying stones. Like I always wear labradorite. For me, labradorite is very good at deflecting negative energy. Other people really like onyx and obsidian, black tourmaline. Dark stones, black stones tend to be very good at deflecting energy. So carry those stones with you. You can even create like a little sachet where you can put sort of protective herbs in it, and put the stones in there and carry that with you. The other thing though is like I like to set up like an energetic barrier around me, and I do lion's breath. And so when I think that somebody has sent me some negative energy, or whether it's intentional or not, because sometimes people's negative energy is just unintentional, I will sort of visualize like a force field being built around me. And sometimes I'll make it even big enough that it's built around my house, for example. And then I do the lion's breath. And so lion's breath looks silly and crazy, but it's super effective. And so you just take a deep breath in. And on the exhale, you stick out your tongue. And sometimes people make like a crazy face and you make like a hissing noise. So it's like, and this is a way to raise energy. And so you kind of build this visualization of this force field around you. And then I do about 4 or 5 of those lion's breaths. And I just imagine just pushing that energy back out away from me. And then I just go from there. I've got this kind of force field built around me. So the other thing I sometimes like to do is I like to draw kind of the general banishing pentagram, which also happens to be the earth banishing pentagram. And I draw it in front of me, and I would say protection in front of me. I draw it behind me, protection behind me, protection to the left of me, protection to the right of me, protection above me, protection below me. And then I sort of imagine drawing like a circle encircling me, and I say protection within me. And I do that 3 times. And the earth banishing pentagram, or the general banishing pentagram, is just like you start in the lower left hand corner and you just draw a star from there. So those are some ways to sort of deflect out the energy. And sometimes we don't think that we have the power to do that, but we absolutely do. I saw you asked this question. It's a frequent question that many people ask. And so I'm just thinking about it the other day. Somebody asked a similar question about what to do when they knew that someone was kind of sending negative thoughts or energy towards them. And one of the comments said, sometimes I just laugh. I just laugh at the idea of it, and that can be enough to break the energy. So sometimes it can be super, super simple like that. It doesn't have to be a big elaborate spell or anything like that. So I hope that helps a little bit. Amy also said a freezer spell. So freezer spell can also work. So you put their name in, write their name on a piece of paper, and then you can put it in an ice tray in your freezer and you freeze it. And then that freezes them with the intention that they will do no harm any longer to you. Like Kurt said, a return to sender spell. That's like got a similar effect to a reversal candle. I've got a lot of good ideas in here, people are saying. Andrea said a mirror spell. You can also do a protection spell for yourself. Okay, here's another question. Amy said, I struggle with getting into alpha state because I can't seem to clear my mind. Yeah. So you do not actually have to have a clear mind to go into alpha state. You just have to be able to bring your brainwave patterns down to a lower level. So sometimes like mantras can help. or doing mudras. So like Sata Nama, Sata Nama, Sata Nama, and just focusing on the chant can be enough to get somebody into an alpha state. But you definitely do not have to feel like as though your mind is clear in order to be there. And then Sabrina is here. She said she should say working better. She's working better with her higher self. Okay. Okay, so I don't see any other questions here. Though I think so. So Sabrina's got one question here at the bottom. It says, "I'm going to other countries currently. What are ways you recommend to honor past lives?" Oh, like in other countries. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. So especially if you're traveling to a place that you think you might have lived in the past. If you're able to sort of light a candle and maybe do some candle gazing and get into a light meditative state, you could just see if you can connect back to those lives that you've lived and see if they can evoke any memories. It also would be cool to try to do a little dream working while you're there, like while you're in a part of the world where you think you may have lived in another life. Set an intention at bedtime that you'd like to connect to who you were when you lived in that place, or you'd like to understand if you lived in that place and what did you do and where did you go. You might also try some of the past life meditations while you're traveling in those other countries. Um, And then Kurt is saying here, you can go to a group you are in and select see all posts. And that's what I recommend. Yeah. So I recommend that most people do not have that selected for their groups. And then they wonder why they're not seeing the group posts. But yeah, if you go to the group, there's a way that you can look at the settings of the group that you're in. And it will probably say see suggested posts. And you want to change that to say see all. Okay, I don't, there's a lot of comments here, so sometimes I get lost in them. I can't see if I've missed any questions. But if I missed any of the questions, I will go back and I will answer anything I missed later. If anybody's got any last minute ones to put them in now. I'm just going to let you know what's coming up. So next week on 225, we're going to have an episode on the dark moon and some magic that you can do for the dark moon. I will be going live an hour and a half early next week than I normally do. So I'm going to be going live at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So the invitation will reflect that. And then I will be back. The following week, we'll be back at our usual time. So on 3/4, we are going to have an episode on signs and synchronicities. On 3/11, we'll have an episode on fostering intuition or strengthening your intuition. And then on 3/18, we'll already be at Ostara and spring equinox. And so we'll have an episode on that. Now, it's looking as though there will be no public Ostara ritual this year open to the general public, but we will have one for our Shadow Seekers group and for our Coven, a combined ritual for all of them. But I will let you know that our Demystifying Witchcraft course is going to be coming out very soon, within the next few weeks here in early March. And anybody who joins that class as a student will be able to come to that ritual. So they'll be able to join our Coven and our Shadow Seekers group, even if you're not a member of one of those, if you're enrolled in that class. Or that course. So the Demystifying Witchcraft course, more information will be coming soon. It's my signature course. And so whereas our Shadow Seekers membership helps people kind of work through their shadow work and their energy work to do that know thyself part and kind of increase their abilities as a witch, the course, the Demystifying Witchcraft course, teaches you the foundations of the craft. So it's the spell work, working with deities. Some of these episodes are like summaries of what we teach in that bigger course. And that course is, at the moment, I think it's 26 hours worth of material. From casting quarters and casting the circle and calling quarters to some more the science of magic, things like that. And then we also have plans to add more material in the future. Anybody who is a student of that course, you never have to purchase the extra material. All the new stuff is yours as we make it. So look for more information on that. Like I said, that's going to be coming out in early March to the general public. And then our Shadow Seekers membership should be opening up again in around April. So as always, it's so nice to be able to spend these Tuesday nights with all of you. I'm looking forward to next week already. I always look forward to these. But if you like what you hear, go ahead and leave a thumbs up or a heart. And that way we can make sure we get this out to the feed of more people. And if you are not a subscriber to our Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe. And that way you won't miss any future episodes. All right, until next time, blessed be.